Hi there, friends. Eric from Hit Subscribe here, and I am doing yet another edition of our freelancer Q&A live stream that I do every week, just about, with the occasional vacation sprinkled in. This week, I have another question from my old backlog of Dead Tech reader questions, but I'm actually getting a little bit more organized about this. So for a long time, I was just kind of like picking titles out of there, especially from some of the earlier, like long ago questions where I just had like titles, meaning like I had a Trello card and then it was like, how do you start a business or whatever? And I would just read that and try to remember what somebody asked me like 4 or 5 years ago. As I've worked through the backlog, my documentation of the questions has gotten better. So I actually have like detailed questions now. And I'm actually, before I start this, thinking to bring that up. So anyway, this is a very long way of saying that I have better context now for some of these questions than I have in the past. So today's question is, what do you do when you have a lucrative client relationship with no trust? And there's a story here. I'm not going to read the entirety of it, but one of the, so I just read $1 Million Consulting. Essentially, I'll go to my notes here, but the gist is the person asking this question was asking about the freelance world, I believe, but it sounds like the person asking this question was actually working for like a custom services agency type of business, so like custom app dev, because they're talking about this being a client of a consulting company or a services company that they worked for. So to set the stage here, the person asking this question works for Staff Augmentation Inc. that's selling application development to another business. So the story here is about that employer's relationship with the company. But I think the question here is essentially like, what do you do if this happens to you? So the story here is that this customer of these custom services was lucrative. So in a sense, it was a good piece of business in that there was a lot of money in play. The firm, I guess, was billing up front for this work, which is always a good thing. I heartily endorse that. But here's the caveat, the catch. So the client didn't trust the service provider with much of anything. So they're, like getting paid, for instance, it sounds like required fighting and even threats, like we're going to stop giving you services and only then would they pay. They wouldn't listen to advice from the services firm. They wouldn't cooperate, it sounds like, in a lot of ways. It says even small things like the timing of calls or like recalling what was said on a call. So it sounds like this firm, the client, was pretty dismissive across the board of the service provider. So kind of extrapolating that to a question that freelancers might ask is like, what would you do if you were a freelancer in this situation? So you have a client that is paying you a good bit of money, so the business is worth it in a financial sense, but the client obviously doesn't trust you. They fight with you and nickel and dime over the bill. You have to like threaten things or wheedle and beg to get paid. They don't trust you to get the timing of phone calls right or to recall what was said. It sounds like generally the client is behaving almost as a terrible micromanaging boss. So the question is, what do you do in this situation? The client is lucrative, but awful. So my advice, or I guess before I get into advice, because I have kind of sketched out 3 routes you could take in order from what I would recommend to least recommend. But before getting to that, I think you need to understand something if you're watching this, which is there is probably no coming back from this for you as a freelancer. If the client views and treats you this way, it is exceedingly unlikely that you are going to navigate this relationship to a point where they don't treat you this way. So like full stop, there isn't some magic spell that you're going to cast and suddenly they're going to be a good client that behaves well. And in fact, I would borderline categorize this treatment under what I would categorize for Hit Subscribe, or what I call, and I didn't come up with this term, I'll get to it in a minute, but the no assholes rule. Now, I don't normally get into the world of profanity. on these streams or on the YouTube channel or whatever, but this is important. There is a book out there called the No Asshole Rule. So I didn't coin that term. The author of this book, it's a great book. It's a short read. I would definitely go read it if you're so inclined. But the author of the book picked the title No Assholes because it's uncomfortable. And essentially, I'm paraphrasing for something I read like 2 or 3 years ago, but the idea was when somebody behaves in this fashion, it should make everyone uncomfortable. So I'm deliberately using a swear word in the title of my book to surface how uncomfortable this should make everybody. And the author's operating thesis that I fully agree with and have adopted for the business that I own is life is too short to deal with assholes. So if you have an employee that is an asshole and it isn't recoverable, so think of the talented jerk, or for those of you who have followed my travel over the years, the expert beginner type, fire that person. Treat that behavior as underperformance. So make collaborative reasonability with other people a first class part of job performance. And so if you have a talented jerk, flip them over from being a talented jerk into an underperformer and say, either you improve this and you stop upsetting everybody, or I'm going to fire you for incompetence. And then either they self-select or they improve. So I fully endorse that as an employer. You do not tolerate this in employees. But crucially, you also don't tolerate these in customers, or this in customers or clients. So if somebody is an irredeemable asshole, if they're abusive, if they treat people poorly, if they're just terrible to be around and they make people's lives miserable, fire that client. Done. Like, life is too short. You will find other clients. Do not put up with that. Do not ask your staff to put up with that. Abusive behavior, no go. This is my personal take. It's a philosophy that I have brought to bear with Hit Subscribe, and it hasn't been necessary all that often over the years, but it has come up, and you can ask people in the organization like Aaron that works for us has seen this firsthand. So I put my money where my mouth is here. I do not tolerate this from clients, from employees, from anybody. And I strongly recommend you adopt the same in your life as a freelancer. Now, I can't tell 3-4 years after this question was asked whether this is truly like, so go read the book, because he lays out, there's a difference between somebody who is like actually an asshole and I forget the name he gives it, but like a temporary one where somebody's just having a bad day. I don't mean to suggest that anytime somebody has an outburst that you consider them irredeemable and, cut bait. But if they are sort of intractably like this, then don't deal with them. So if we are talking about a situation where the client contact is this way, I unambiguously advise you to fire this client. I promise you, your life will be better. I don't care if they have a dump truck of money outside. It's just not worth it. Don't do it. So that is, if they are truly in this category, I unambiguously recommend that you fire them immediately and run away and figure something else out. Now, let's assume that something a little more subtle is going on here. Maybe the services firm, or maybe, if you're a freelancer and you're in this situation, you did something to kind of unearn their trust, or that you're at fault in some way. And maybe they're not abusive or anything. They just, for some reason, don't trust you. Let's proceed with my recommendations under the assumption that they are not actually assholes, and that they, probably have some reason to trust you, or maybe they're just really neurotic or something. So moving on, that's the assumption we're making. The first thing I would suggest doing is still firing the client, but not like immediately, like, here's your money back, bye. I would instead say, take into account what I'm saying here, which is there is probably no coming back from this situation, and make other plans. So in the same way that if you were working a salaried job and your manager were treating you like this, go look for other jobs, like start that now and get out of there. I would say that with the client. So try to find other clients, try to find other business. If they're paying you a particularly high rate, try to find other businesses paying you that rate. Settle for a lower rate with another business, but make an exit strategy here would be my first recommendation. The reason I'm saying this is it's just really hard to come back from a lack of trust. So there is an obvious asymmetric power balance in this relationship. The client is shoveling crap onto you and you're taking it for some reason. So something puts you in this situation where you let that happen. It's tough to recover from that. It's tough to come back from that. For some reason, they don't trust you. They don't view you as a true partner. They don't respect you, it sounds like. And I don't know what led to that situation in this instance, or, in the hypothetical instance of you, the viewer watching this. I don't know what caused this, but it exists. And it's kind of hard to come back from somebody viewing you as needing to be micromanaged or incompetent, or needing the relationship a lot more than you do. It is hard to bring things back to the level from there. It's going to be a slog if you choose to do that. So I would absolutely, if you need to pay the mortgage, you do what you got to do. But I would form an exit strategy. That is my absolute recommendation, number one, because it's unlikely you're going to remedy the situation. Now, let's assume you can't or don't want to do that for some reason. My second, plan B, if you will, is to wait out or work around your main contact. So I can't, again, speak to this situation from several years ago and what was going on, but it doesn't seem likely that an entire organization has a micromanaging, borderline a-hole kind of ethos that they all abide by, meaning it's pretty likely that this behavior is coming from one or two like main points of contact or something like that, that it's more localized than endemic to an organization. And again, if it is endemic to that organization, I'll just circle back to my first point, which is don't have anything to do with this toxic organization that seems to be attracting the worst people. But it is probable that you are dealing with a client contact that is a micromanager, neurotic, whatever is going on here. So a plan B would be, trying to wait out that person, because somebody who behaves like this tends to get fired fairly frequently or find ways to, work their way out of organizations. If you are in it for the long haul and you wait it out, this person will probably go away. So you could wait them out, or you could look for opportunities to have other client points of contact. Now, I believe that based on the timeline of this question, we're probably talking about custom app dev. So I don't know what the role that was in charge of this was, but one way to work around the role would be to go up the org chart. Now, this is hard to do. You can't just, go full Karen and demand to speak to a supervisor or whatever. But you could look to engineer ways to get a little bit of airtime. So if we're talking about a VP of software engineering and there's a CTO above them, you could try to manufacture some way to be on a call with that CTO from time to time. This is difficult because you can't really give the contact wind that you're trying to get a hold of their boss. But if you ask questions that they won't know the answer to, but their boss will, sometimes that can result in a boss call. If you offer to do something like make an executive deck, they're probably not going to take you up on that if they don't trust you. So anyway, I don't want to get too far down into the weeds here, but if it's getting on the phone with the boss, that's probably the most likely way to engineer some jujitsu in the relationship. It's also typically the toughest to do, because in order to introduce you to their boss, somebody generally has to trust you. Like that up org chart introduction tends to happen when a contact is over the moon about the relationship, not distrustful of it. If, it's app dev, like maybe there's other organizations that are like a lateral move that could use some help with app dev. So maybe there's different like teams within the client or different departments or whatever. You could see about an introduction of that nature, because if you've already gone through their vendor onboarding process, then being handed around the organization is fairly straightforward. I'm trying to think if you could look to be handed off to a subordinate. That's usually not a good move for a services business. But if, the person you're talking to is just awful and they have a nice subordinate, that subordinate might either directly or inadvertently shield you from the worst vagaries of the boss. So that is a move you could think about. It's hard for me to recommend wanting to be handed down the org chart. But anyway, my point is, think about who else you have relationships with at that company, and could you kind of expand those relationships or in some fashion work around that person. That would be my plan B, is just to try to figure out a way to deal less and less and less with the toxic person themselves, and maybe cultivate relationships in the organization that are healthier. The last one would be trying to, stick it out and somehow reset the power balance in the relationship. Ironically enough, usually your best bet for doing this is my option one, which is fire them. So just say, I'm done. I'm not going to work with you anymore. That actually a surprising amount of time immediately level sets things, especially if something is in flight and they need you. So the question that I was referring to mentioned stop do or threaten to stop doing the work because they're not paying you. So you could, they're clearly susceptible to threats. So what you could think about doing is channeling that same thing and saying like, okay, you haven't been paying, and also you are frankly unpleasant to deal with. I don't want to be asked anymore. If you know, like some of the things that were said in here, like can't even be trusted with small things like the time of a call or what was said on the call. So, you know, you don't pay on time, and also you keep second guessing me on the most basic of things. It sounds like you don't trust me. I think we should be done. Um, so you could enumerate the issues that you're having here and basically come back and say, either these things all change materially and you agree to that now, or I'm going to end this relationship. So the firing or the threat of a firing can often jolt the relationship back into a healthier power dynamic. But be forewarned here, it also often tends to result in just a breakup. So this is a pretty drastic move. It tends to be the most effective one. And the thing is, anything short of that, you don't have much power. You're in this asymmetric power relationship where this client walks all over you. And up to this point, aside from the occasional saber rattling about cutting off service, you've let them. So it's kind of hard to persuade them to take you seriously, other than with the most kind of dramatic of threats. But, you know, you can try. You can raise your objections. You can try to slowly, over the course of time, set boundaries. You can try to create some wins for them so that they start to trust you more. If you're able to manufacture some kind of win that that person can bring to their boss, usually that is the best way to get into the good graces of a client contact. So forget about like doing the work well or the typical things that like IC type freelancers will be concerned about, and think more about like, what could I do in this relationship that would get this person a promotion? What could I do that they could bring to their boss at their annual review and say, here was an absolute home run? If you can start to ferret out, sniff out, and deliver wins of that nature to that contact, then there is a fighting chance they might start to view you more favorably, extend you more trust, and so on and so forth. But I got to say, the odds of that, especially if the person or people in question here are as toxic as they sound, the odds of that are not real likely. I guess, you know, so I'm going to wrap here with the advice. But the other thing I should say to everybody watching this is I am assuming, you know, general like competence on the part of the business that was servicing this. I don't know what went into this to create this lack of trust from a client. And things are obviously a little bit more nuanced when we're talking about a consulting firm versus a freelancer. So it might be, for all I know, that the person asking the question in all of their relationships, they delivered and did good work for this client, but that there are other people at the question asker's organization that did crap work and kind of, you know, created this lack of trust. So it might be that this is a commodity vendor by and large doing commodity work, and that's why they're not being trusted. So I don't mean to presume that the client is horrible. I'm just kind of going with what's here and interpolating this to the relationship that one of you might have with a client, and thus assuming that you're acting in good faith and not deserving to be treated this way. So I'm making a fair bit of inferences here and trying to turn this into some generally actionable advice for freelancers. So to kind of recap here, if you are in this asymmetric relationship where you are being micromanaged and treated badly by a client, in order, my recommendations are fire that client. It's only a question of whether you do it slowly or immediately if they're truly in violation of the no assholes rule. So number one, you should probably fire that client. Number two, you should look for a different contact within that client if you don't want to fire the client. And number three, if you absolutely must, you could slowly but surely try to win them over, or, you know, perform some like kind of ultimatum to flip the relationship. But you know, by the time we're down there at option three, I just really don't recommend that. One closing bit of advice that I'll offer here is There is a book by Michael Michalowicz that is called The Pumpkin Plan. If you're an indie, a freelancer, and you're struggling with this type of thing, it's a good thing to go read. It essentially invites you to audit your book of business and to, I don't want to get the figures wrong, but I think he says like that, figure out who your 20%, the 20% best clients you've had over the years, and laser focus on trying to find and serve more of those clients. Cull the bottom ones, forget about it. And it's a scary piece of advice to take, because the question is prominently featuring the idea that this client is lucrative, and it's easy to get golden handcuffed and say like, oh, this is paying my mortgage. What am I going to do? Go read this book, because it's pretty both informative and inspirational for like, you don't have to live your life that way. It won't seem like it in the moment, but horrible clients take up so much headspace. So not only are they demanding, and not only do they take up lots and lots of like your day-to-day and billable time, but they psychically exhaust you, and they sap you of all of your creative energy. So you will tend to be worse at finding new business, thinking about new business, being innovative, doing all the things that you ought to be doing, both in your day-to-day and sort of subconsciously at feeling good about yourself. Bad clients like this absolutely destroy you in a whole variety of professional ways. You would be amazed at how much better you will feel 2-3 months after firing a terrible client. Like, the stories out there, and this is why I'd say go read the book, but like, people, are like, oh my goodness, I am so thankful that I did this. It was the best decision I ever made. Now I have this like wonderful new client. It's kind of like organizations I give advice to about, they're so terrified of firing expert, beginner, talented jerk types. Whenever they do it, it is within weeks that they are saying in my management consulting travels, oh my God, I wish I had done this years ago. Why did I put up with this? Life is too short. It will be good for your business. Don't put up with clients like these. It's not worth it. I promise you. Go find something else. So, hopefully all that is helpful, or at least interesting, and I will catch you all next time.